Folks, it's Lou. Here we are starting another glamorous day as a podcaster, and I can tell you how lucky I am commuting into my office today. Temperature is all the way up to 18 degrees now, so it's been really nice. Check out this beautiful thing. Unfortunately, my office does not have an internal stairway, and getting down these stairs is probably going to be a bit of a challenge as I go ahead and spill my coffee everywhere because we got a little bit of snow. That's no big deal, right? Except coming down here to my office, it's a little bit trashed at the moment. So let's go take a quick look at what's going on here. Well, that used to be the heater. It didn't work anyway, so it's a good thing it's 50 degrees in this office. Oh yeah, office is completely trashed. Perfect.
Greetings and welcome to the IT SPARCcast Deep Dive. I'm your host, John Barger.
I'm your host, Lou Schmidt. Yes, I made it down the stairs without dying.
IT SPARCcast Deep Dive is a venture into topics that we feel are important, with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts, both with over 20 years of experience working in IT or for IT vendors.
And remote work is a topic we very much care about. These days, you're seeing it in the news as a mechanism to be used to get rid of people. We've gone over, and we'll post a link, and you'll see it show up here at some point, to our rationale as to why we think this is an incredible multiplier for your force and for the success of your company. But you can't just jump in there and say, hey, just like we did in COVID, there was a big challenge there. So what we're doing step by step is we're going through some of the parts of where you'll be successful, where you'll run into trouble. And in this episode, what we'd like to talk about is the background.
If you haven't seen them, go watch the first two episodes that we did on remote work. We'll provide you a link. If you're on YouTube, you'll see that link appear above Lou's head. And if you're in the audio podcast, you'll see that link appear in the show notes. Along with that link, you'll also see our previous series on AI in K-12, which is also a great watch. Lou, do you want to give us a quick recap of what we did in the last two episodes?
Absolutely. This is obviously something we care very much about because we've been both remotely managed remote workers and we've managed remote workers. And we've learned through our experience how to make this work and how to make it work very successfully. So for us, it was really great. So in the first episode, we basically dive deep into this and tell you, why do you want to care about this? Why do you want to do this? In the second episode, we give you an outline of all that we're going to cover in this series as we go on over time. There'll be breaks and stuff while we go and look at other things, but we're going to complete this series from management to what sort of video conferencing, what are expectations, what the difference between a huddle and a small meeting and a big meeting are, all this stuff we're going to cover. Today, what I'd like to talk about is the background.
Now, you may be thinking, didn't we already learn this in 2020? And as IT, why do I really care? Well, let me address both of those. So in 2020, most of us learned some things about how to be in an online meeting. Some of us learned a lot. Lou and I learned a lot as we were actually owning part of this process. Some of us learned little to nothing. And I see way too many professionals from all different walks of life show up to their online meetings with garbage audio, bad backgrounds, bad video, bad lighting, and so forth. So it's really important that we work with you and you understand how to do this. Now to the second, let me actually take that another step further. You wouldn't show up to an in-person meeting with messy hair and a ripped t-shirt. So why would you show up to a virtual meeting where people can't understand what you're saying, or it's hard for them to understand what you're saying, or they have trouble seeing you, or you're distracting because of how poor the quality is? Think of it as just the same way. Show up just as you would if you're on site. Now, as to why I care as an IT professional, we've discussed this before, but IT is the enabling factor for remote work. If IT fails at that, remote work will fail. If the CEO gets pissed off because everyone looks or sounds horrible in a virtual meeting, he's going to implement a return to office, or he's going to find IT staff that can support his vision. So our job is to make remote work possible, and we need to do everything we can, including being an example to the rest of the company.
You should also be the one they go to for tips on this stuff. And as John has mentioned, one of the first things we talk about is this should be basic 101, but when you add video into the equation, things become a little more tangled. How you dressed is really that you should be thinking about what can go wrong. Now, I have a different background from John. I'm used to wearing a uniform. I started my working life being brainwashed by the US military, and showing up your individualism by how you dressed wasn't a thing you did in the military, in any of the militaries, right? You're not allowed to do that in the US military. So I got used to it. So you might wonder, if you've seen previous episodes, you'll normally see me in a black turtleneck. In this case, it's about 50 degrees in this room because I don't have the heat pump hooked up yet, which is why this area is so trashed. We'll talk about that in a second. So I'll put on a jacket. I try to put on the same one every time. But you'll notice when I do that they're simple. And the reason I do that is because I went up, you're going to go, oh, Steve Jobs wannabe. I went and looked at why he did that. Why did Steve Jobs dress the way he did? And I read through his reasoning and I said, that actually makes a lot of sense. So it's not for everybody. Some people like to wear a uniform, have a signature look, whatever. Some people don't. But the thing that I would advise you is keep it simple if you can, right? Striped shirts, they're going to combat with the CCDs in these cameras, right? These cameras are laid out in grids. If you have a grid talking to a grid, you'll get something called a moire pattern. That can cause issues. It's a distraction, and that's something you don't want to be distracting your viewer from the message you're actually trying to get across. So, basically there's that. If you're going to stand up and walk around, wear something that's appropriate with it. I have on the adult version of sweatpants right now, sweatpants encased in canvas because it's cold. But that's fine. I could stand up and walk around. I'd be fine with it. Just make sure if you were just dressed as if you were going to be meeting with a client you haven't met before, because on these calls you often do.
So I had an HR leader that I worked with several years ago, and during the 2020 timeframe, she was great. She actually just retired. She's one of my favorite HR people I've ever worked with. And she made this similar comment, is like, show up presentable as if you were to work, above the waist. That's all people are generally going to see. Have a nice shirt on, a nice blouse, appropriate attire. If you're going to an important meeting, maybe consider a tie and a jacket. It depends on the environment. Treat it as if you were there in person. And then, funny, coming from an HR leader, she said, below the waist, party on. Right. So do whatever it is that you need to do that to be comfortable. And, we know that soft clothing became a big thing during that time frame as well. So people were comfortable. Be warm. Don't be shivering, whatever it is that takes place. But present yourself as if you were showing up to an in-person meeting.
Now, that said, be aware of your environment, because we've all probably seen the videos of the individuals that were in a business attire up, and then one of their young children opens a door behind them and starts yelling. They've got to stand up and go to that door. Probably don't want to be in your boxer shorts for that. So think about contingencies. Now, the rest of this, we're going to talk a bit about the background, and you'll notice my background right now is trashed. Right? It's going to be a window right there. There's an air conditioning head unit up here, a heat pump system that's going to hook up to a compressor down below. As soon as temperature breaks 30 degrees here, I'll be down there with the power tools. There's going to be another window behind me. We will discuss in the third of this micro part of this series, probably the fifth part of our remote work, how light plays into this. But as you can see, even though I have a dedicated space right now, it's trashed. What do you do about it? Well, let's talk about some of the tools that you have built in. So here's the cool thing. I am currently using StreamYard. I'm pulling up the virtual background. You have this in Zoom. You have this in Teams. You have this in WebEx. Let's try a few things. First of all, here's the basic blur. I just blurred my background. Right now, the camera in my MacBook is interacting with, it knows to focus on me because it's a fair, this M4 MacBook Pro. It's got guts, right? And it actually, this looks pretty good, but you could still tell there's something off in the background here. Now, if you're at a kitchen table, you're somewhere out on a porch or something, often this is going to be good enough. It works better if you have, a green screen or something else, and we'll get to that in just a second. But what if this isn't good enough? You can still tell it's trash back here, right? Okay, fine. Let's do a virtual background. Virtual background, I've uploaded. Now this gets interesting because you can see that the color of my hat has the algorithm is having trouble with my hat and the color of my background. Now, if I was to switch this to something else that didn't include that color, it will probably work better.
One of the other things you'll notice is Lou's wearing a headset, and headsets are notorious for creating what we call windowing. So you can actually see the real background through the insets in his headset, the cutouts there, and see through it. So if what you're trying to hide is really inappropriate or ugly or whatever, be aware of that the headset is going to cause you problems.
We really like virtual backgrounds. When we were doing meetings at our last company together, we had recommended virtual backgrounds that we all used. There was enough individual choice available in the backgrounds that you could sort of say, okay, this is my office, that's your office. You can even see now here, just with my hands moving, contrast and stuff like that. Computer's going to have challenges with this, so you're going to want to minimize your movements. I'm a hand talker and I move around, so this doesn't work as well for me. This is a question of your individual style. Now, you're an IT professional. You are probably the one who's tasked with taking these pre-canned backgrounds and making sure that they're in the download of the client you use. One suggestion I have, and then I'll let John chime in on this one, do not choose these backgrounds yourself. Go talk to marketing, because this is part of your outbound. We called it, I've done time in marketing, so my brain's been damaged that way. It's called a slick, right? They're your graphics images, the colors, all the stuff that defines your brand. When you're in a company, you're going to have a virtual background that becomes part of your brand. So I found it best, always go talk to them. Marketing folks are always delighted to do this for you. They love to get their brand stuff out there. John, do you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, a few things. One is you're absolutely right on the marketing thing. So it's easy for all of us of any department to look at another department and think that job is easy or is less important. And marketing is one of those that gets targeted a lot. But IT is as well. Like, well, why can't you keep the network up? Why can't you do this? Why is this thing? You get a lot of that kind of stuff. It's easy. Why are you having problems with this? And we know it's not easy, right? Marketing's not easy either. And you can question values of X, Y, or Z. But one of the things that they are really good at is putting together content. And that content, in this case, is a way to show up to a meeting and look like a representative of the company. Now, stepping back a little bit, my opinion, and I haven't even talked to Lou about this yet, but my opinion is a natural background is always your best option if you have one. I'm super lucky. I have an office here in my house that is my dedicated office that I can do whatever I want. I can configure it the way I want. And I know that the kids are not going to come busting through the door and disrupt me during a meeting. Not everybody's that lucky, and I get that. Sometimes we're working from the couch or from the kitchen table or from somewhere else. And sometimes the background is not something that we want to present to the world. And that's where your blurs and virtual backgrounds come in. And that's why they are important. So in my
Absolutely.
rules, my rules are actual background if you can, a physical background that looks presentable. If you can't, then you move on to something else to mask that.
And what you're going to see here as time goes on back here, because I've got 2 windows to put in and all this good stuff, so the background will gradually get better and better and better, because I do have control over that. I will choose a color, probably a light sage color to paint it, to make it look nicer, all that stuff. But I realize that you may not have control over that, or you may be working with people who don't have control over that. But as you can see, there's challenges with doing virtual backgrounds. So how do you deal with that? There is a trick you can do. So I have visual aids this time, and then we'll see if they come through. Another problem with virtual backgrounds is that the system wants to clip them out, right? It's going to aggressively look to clip them out. So if you're doing show and tell in a meeting, for example, you're a company that sells hardware and you want to say, oh, look at my cool hardware. You see the problem you run into, right? This is one of the solutions that you can barely see. So what I'm going to do is turn this off. So when I turn it on again, you will understand the power of it. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about getting a green screen. Now, green screens are absolutely, see, once again, we're back, but here, how much nicer that is, right? So
For those of you on the audio podcast, Lou has a rolled up green screen that looks like it's rolled around a tube and it's got some Velcro straps keeping it in place. And those things are great. And I'll let Lou continue, but it doesn't
like
have to be perfectly
$40.
flat. It doesn't have to be a painted wall. The systems that do the chroma keying are really, really good at it. And that is a significant way to up your game. I actually have one I'm about to install at some point that attaches to the ceiling and is a pull down like a movie projector. That's completely out of the way all the time. And if I do want to pull it down, if I want to go virtual, I can, and then you'll never notice it.
You mentioned a really good point there, and that is chroma keying. So how do these things work, and do they have to be green? The honest answer is no, they don't have to be green. Sometimes if you like to wear green, one of the reasons we use green screens is historic. In television, when they first came up with the idea of chroma keying or keying a video overlay to a color, they use green. Why did they use green? Nobody's really sure, but I think it's probably because you were less likely to be wearing it. People then started, like if you were on television, you were a little more sober, you're wearing a darker color, a white shirt, a tie that was red or blue or black, the similar sort of thing. Whatever happened, green screen became the moniker. And we've all seen, or you may have seen them shooting special effects for actors in front of a green screen so they can composite everything in. You can do similar things in your home office. Now, I showed you one of these things. John, it is, to me, really interesting that you mentioned that the idea of doing one that's sort of like a movie screen. So what I'm holding here for folks on audio is yet another green screen I purchased off our good friend that rhymes with or same name as a rather large river out in Brazil. And we all know that. I don't believe this thing costs more than $120. It's a pop-up green screen. And I really like this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and implement it now so I can just go ahead and show you folks.
So while Lou's doing that setup, I'll just tell a quick story. So one of the things that we talked about in the past episode was to make things fun. And so let's say that you're doing a Halloween meeting. One of the fun things you could do is if you have a green screen behind you and wear a green t-shirt, and you could be a floating head. And that would be kind of fun for a Halloween level episode, just to kind of lighten the mood, or a Halloween meeting, I should say. But that's just a little trick you can do. You probably wouldn't want to do that the majority of the time, but it's something you could do for fun.
So this can be a little challenging in a room like this. So I would have to redirect my screen. And what I've found is, first of all, if you're using huge drills to drill a hole in your wall, you're going to have to move them. But I can reach back here and sort of position this thing and move myself versus it until, now normally I have a lot more time to set this up. Now I can go ahead and say, fine. So this is a green screen background. One of the things you have to watch, and we'll talk about this in lighting, is you have to have a fairly even lighting across it. You don't really want a huge gradient because the software will have trouble figuring this out. I'm going to go back into my virtual background. You'll notice if you're on, we're using StreamYard here. If you're on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, there's a setting that says, I have a green screen.
Yep.
And it even gives you the option to say green or blue on, for example, StreamYard. So if I click on this, well, hey, here's the fun part. I'm wearing a green jacket, right?
Yeah.
Talk to the floating hand. So why is this useful? This is useful because one of the things you can do, you'll notice that we're not seeing the artifacting here anymore, right? But let's say you can overlay in the background a presentation, wear something the same color, and have Mr. Hand floating in the background pointing to your presentation. Now, I've used this in video training before.
Yep.
And it worked out really, really well. But sometimes your Mac camera moves around. And you can see the challenge with positioning it. So make sure that your camera focus and your green screen is enough that you can get in on this thing and have it fill the entire background. I tend to like rollout ones for this reason, but this one turned out to be really handy for a time like this, where I just needed to pop something up really quick, or I wanted to, I've got a sudden construction project or something crash down, I'm in, right?
Well, since we're
John,
doing show and tell, and Lou and I actually didn't talk about show and tell ahead of the thing, but I actually have show and tell I'm going to throw out. I have a green screen that's pulling out. If you look at it, it's a circle, and it unfolds to a larger circle that has straps that will attach to your chair. So it moves with you. So that actually, it creates like a wraparound. And so when a green screen moves, you don't see it if you have a virtual background. So this is something that I'm a big fan of, and I used on quite a few meetings before I had any kind of background behind me. And I've used it for, for other reasons if I wanted to put maybe a customer logo or something else in the background. So that's a thing that you can try as well. Though that was like $30 on Amazon, and it works really well. It's nice and wide, and you might need to zoom in on your camera. Most external cameras, especially, have an ability to do a zoom in where you can kind of make sure you crop out any external borders.
I'm using the internal camera on this thing. My external camera, which is not behaving with StreamYard for some reason. We're still troubleshooting on that. Would have been able to zoom in on it. John, your point is excellent. Why do I really like the solution you had? If you're sitting at your living room, you're sitting at your dining room table, you're sitting in an office with people behind you, even if you're in a cubicle, bam, just fantastic. So this is, but once again, you saw the challenge I ran into. Even though this jacket is not the same exact color as that green screen, system definitely picked up on it.
Yeah. And so if you are somebody that wears a lot of green in your everyday life, maybe get a blue screen.
Get a blue one.
Right?
Get a blue screen.
So just keep that in mind. But if you do wear a similar color to whatever your background is, you are going to fade into it to some degree.
So to recap, watch what you wear. Be simple. One of the other things I didn't really get a chance to talk about is when you're customizing your background, so you have a background more like John's, we all want to individualize. And John, I think you've done a really nice job on yours. But a lot of folks have temptations to put a bunch of pictures and stuff in there. Don't put a picture in your background if you don't want everybody to know about it. Your family, whatever it is, you need to be very carefully stage what's in your background. Use of virtual backgrounds like blurring is great. What's great is you can do it on the go. Use of virtual backgrounds with images is good. One thing that I didn't look at was you can put your own virtual images in these things, right? I tend to go for like nature stuff from around where I am. Lots of waterfalls, great woods, plenty of big rocks, all the stuff that you would see. You go up to the high country of North Carolina, look at. So the sort of stuff I use for my backgrounds if I want to have a natural looking background, something from autumn when our color just goes absolutely nuts here. Always a good background. But I try to stay away from anything that sends a message other than tranquility. And then the last thing is With virtual backgrounds, you need to tune a bit. Green screens are lovely. Highly recommend them. Just dress better than I did. And but I thought it was a great example. And as you can see, even though I'm in sort of a not a great case scenario at the moment, I got to get this stuff done, but I still need to do this. And you will find yourself and your users in this position. And when they come to you with these challenges, or when you encounter these challenges, these answers will work. They'll work for you on the background. I think that's about it. Have we hammered this one to death? Other than just spending 5 million on a house?
I think we have. So that is going to cover this episode. And we couldn't do podcasts like this without listeners like you. So we want to hear from you. Do you agree with what we're saying? Do you have different views? Do you have additional tips and tricks that we could share? Is there something else you want to know about that we haven't covered so far? Send an email to feedback@itsparkcast.com. That's feedback at itsparkcast.com, or hit us up on X at itsparkcast. Be sure to hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications. That's really going to help this channel grow. Tell your friends about us, tell your colleagues about us. Hopefully you're finding this information valuable. If you are, share that information with them so that they can learn some of the great things that you're learning as well. We're going to be back on Friday for news and opinions from the world of enterprise IT. And then we'll be back on Wednesday next week, where we continue our topic on remote work. We're going to be covering lighting and how to properly light yourself so that you do show up better in our next deep dive following this one. So I think that's going to cover it for this episode. Thank you very much for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks.